surprise for you. So I have the great honor of co-presenting with Rachel Downie from Bulla Dairy today. And Rachel and I have had many conversations around culture and the great work that the team and Rachel are doing at Bulla. And having Rachel provide you with some really hands-on, incredibly well thought through actions that Bulla has taken today, I think is just marvelous. Rachel, can I put you on the spot here and ask you for a little bit of an introduction to those that might not have met you yet?
Yeah, thanks for that, Lauren. Just throw me in there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hi, everyone. I hope I can live up to the high expectations that Lauren's put out there. I'm Rachel Downie, and I'm the Head of Food Safety and Quality at Bulla Dairy Foods. For those who don't know Bulla, we're a 110 or 11 now year-old company, and we've got 4 manufacturing sites and a DC based in Victoria. And yeah, I won't take up too much more time, but I'll chime in along the way when Lauren gets to my slides.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Rachel, for joining. One of the things that I've always appreciated with Rachel is that Rachel is known for telling it the way it is, and that includes what works really well and what might have been some of the challenges. And I think we can all learn from those along the way as well. So today, what I'd really like to do is, as promised in the title that Rachel and I are going to be speaking to, I'd like to just touch on some of the dairy and culture learnings since 2014 and 21. That's the time that we at Cultivate have been involved in this particular topic of food safety culture, doing assessments with companies around the world. And we have a good portion of dairy companies, global dairy companies from Europe, Australia, and from North America. That's part of that those learnings in that 6-year period. Or sorry, 7 years coming up. Time's flying. Then I'm going to also just talk a little bit about what we call mind the gap. When we talk about culture, there's some gaps that can really be quite serious when you're looking at your culture. And how can you get started? So if you are in a food manufacturing company or a processing unit or in the food business in any way, shape or form, where you're looking to do something with your food safety culture, what are some of the steps that you can take to that? And I'll hone in on specifically the question mark in that sentence. So let's get going. On the first one, on the, just like Jennifer is introducing Dairy Australia, my colleagues at Cultivate SA would also kill me if I didn't just give you an understanding of who we are. So what we spend our time doing is really working with companies around the world to build understanding first and foremost, and that is through leadership workshops, position papers, standards that we're part of developing, and it's all related to how the organizational culture can either help or hinder food safety. Then we do a lot of measuring across these companies across the world as well, and help companies nudge their culture along. So we do that through assessments and using a tool called Pulse that we have. Then there's lots around change and sustain as well. Some of the things that Rachel and I are working on together is really around changing culture as well. And how do you now sustain the gains that you've made? Because changing can be relatively easy. Sustaining what you've now learned can be a little harder. And we have lots of tools and reviews for doing that. These are some of our fabulous clients and partners that we have across the world. Good mix of all sorts of sectors, both manufacturing and retail, but certainly also, as you know, in the dairy industry. So let's jump into what we've learned. What are some of those highlights from 2014 to 2021 over the last almost 6.5 years? One thing that I wanted to hone in on there first is this notion of walking the talk. So when we're talking about food safety culture, what we say and what we do is a big part of that. Is when leadership is committing to doing something, are they also following up with actions? If we've been trained on something as part of a processing line, are we also consistently acting and behaving that way? So walking the talk is a way to measure if there's a difference between what we're saying and what we're doing. And it can be broken into whether we have a tendency to over-report the positive. It can be broken into whether we're under-reporting the negatives, and also whether there's a bit of a concern for image. And what that means is, are we actually freely willing to stand up and say, this is where I think there might be a challenge that we need to deal with, even if it goes against the popular thought of a company. And again, when we look at measuring culture, this particular measure is really important, because we need to have an understanding for when people are either answering survey questions, when we're doing interviews, or we're conducting focus groups. All three parts are standard in our food safety culture assessment. Then we have to also be able to say, is there part of the answers that we're both hearing and getting back in the data that shows a little bit of a gap between what is being said and what's being done. And this particular scale that's in the paper from 2017, if you're interested in reading more about it, is really a way of gauging, is there a gap between what anybody is saying and what they're doing? The target here is to get to a score of 0. And that's because when there's no difference between what I say and what I do, then we have no gap, and the score is 0. So it's a reverse scale in this particular case. Now we can, throughout the assessments that we've done, we can also look at this data by country. And I thought I would pull that up in here because there's an interesting way of looking at it, specifically when we're looking at Australia. So with the Australian companies that we had at the point of this baseline being run, there's a significant gap. It's actually quite a bit higher than what we see in some other countries. And if we're looking into some of Aaron Meyer's or Hofstadter's work on national culture and characteristics of national cultures, there's a direct link with that as well. So what this means is that with the companies that we have in this particular baseline that are Australian based, there is a tendency to have a bigger gap between what I say and what I do. Or in other words, there's some challenges with maybe having that challenging conversation, having somebody sit across from you that might not have followed up on what they were taught or what they were with the behaviors that were expected of them. And therefore, we have a bit of a gap between what we hear versus what it is that a person will go out and do. And by definition, our food safety culture is about how we have these shared assumptions for what is valid and how is it, what's valid for food safety when we behave every day. And if those behaviors that we've now deemed valid are not exactly what we're saying, then we can have a bit of a risk in our culture to actually think that something is going on when it's not, because it's not what we're seeing in behaviors every day. So I call attention to this because I think it's also one of the points that many of our Australian clients are really working hard on is how can you provide some systems and expectations for everybody in your food company to say, if you see something, then you need to raise your hand, or if something is not easy for you to do and we're expecting you to do, we need to hear from you. Don't set the expectations out that you just have to do what we're saying, because you might actually not hear back because of this particular cultural traits. And it is a relatively large gap that we're measuring, again, and it could indicate a reluctancy to challenge or speak up openly about them. But there are things that you can do about that. There are things that you can put in place. And Rachel, I know that you have at Bulla been working through this very point by looking at your company values and also some of how you're translating that into expectations for food safety. Is that right?
Yeah, Lone. I think one of the things that we needed to do when we started talking about food safety culture and how we would actually implement that, or even what it was, we had to sell the message to the business, and that wasn't just the executive team, that was everyone, and most predominantly the people who are actually out on the floor making our food and the people that we rely on the most to make sure that it's safe. So we had to sort of get a story out to them that made sense. So what I did was look at our company values that people were pretty comfortable with and familiar with, and they all understood them, and really map that out to food safety values and how those things link together. So because we're a family company, we've been in the same 3 families for as long as we've existed, the value of we are family is very strong, and that's not just our business owner families, it's the many families that have worked in our business for many years, and we have generations of people from the same family from the town of Colac, where we're mainly based, that have worked there. So that's a really strong value that people understand. So when we're mapping that to food safety, it was really important to just call out that our food needs to be safe for our family, friends, and community. And that becomes a real thing, and it's how we make food safety resonate with people and matter to them in the same way that workplace safety matters to them. We really needed to sort of get that switch going in their mind that food safety wasn't just about passing audits. There's a real personal story behind it. There's a real outcome that we want for our consumers, for our community, our friends and family. One of our values is achieving goals together. So that relates to, from a food safety perspective, teams supporting each other to ensure that our food's safe, everyone working together, everyone doing the right thing. One thing that I really think is one of the most powerful values is the courage to think differently. And when it comes to food safety and being responsible for food safety out on the production floor, it's really about the courage to have tough conversations and to be able to stop the line if something's wrong. And I'll probably talk to that in a bit more detail down the track with another slide. But we often say in manufacturing, oh, you know, you're all empowered to stop the line if it's not right. But culturally, if you're not supported to do that, or if you don't feel that that's a safe space for you to do it, or you don't feel that your boss is supporting that decision, then it's easy to say, but it's really, really difficult to do. So that was one of the messages that we had to get across to people. Hear and be heard really ties into that as well, that the food safety value connected to that is to listen and act if team members report a food safety hazard, and to be always talking about food safety. We're trying to encourage our leaders across the business to get out in the factory and just have conversations with people, ask questions that are related to food safety. And customer at the heart is one of our values. So that relates directly to our consumers and the people that we need to think about when we're making decisions that can affect food safety. And lastly, the value that we have of leadership by all really is the clear message that food safety is everyone's responsibility. It's not just my team, which is pretty commonly held belief in manufacturing, that food safety is only the quality team's responsibility, but no, it's everyone's responsibility. So yeah, that's one of the key tools that we've been using to build our food safety culture. Thanks, Simon.
That's brilliant, Rachel. And I think if we're looking at that gap again between what I say and what I do, you've really taken a very systemic approach and given people some tools to say, if I don't feel that I have if I'm not confident or don't have the courage to speak up if something's not right, then I can make a reference to, well, we said our value is this. So I'm just gonna let you know that I think I see that this could be improved or something like that. So I really like that, Rachel, because you're setting some clear expectations, but you're also giving people some tools that they can use to overcome that potential walking the talk gap. Is that right?
Yep.
Yeah.
That's good.
Thank you. I appreciate it. So if we are moving into just looking a little bit more at what we've learned specifically to dairy as well, we've worked with the Dairy Marketing Institute, DMI, in Chicago, and formed a partnership with them. And what it's about is really to develop and make available a global dairy culture dashboard for food, let me try that again. One global dairy dashboard for food safety and quality culture, so that dairy companies like yours, you can see yourself against the benchmark for other companies in the dairy industry globally. It is scientifically validated and it's mapped to the GFSI dimensions and the cultivate maturity model. So let me just talk about that for just a little bit. one of the things I had the chance to chair the GFSI working group on food safety culture, and an outcome of that was, well, how can we best define food safety culture, and what are some of the components of food safety culture? And these 5 dimensions are core to that position paper, and there's a little bit more detail about that in the paper from 2017 as well. If we look at them, it's about around vision and mission, and I just want to go back to what we just saw from Rachel in the Bulla values. Really key to say, how are you actually incorporating food safety into what your company stands for from a vision and also from a mission and values perspective? How do you translate the very identity of your company and where it's going to include food safety? And that building that in, integrating food safety into who you are as an organization is core to culture for sure. People is the second dimension there, and that has a lot to do with how you learn about food safety, what are the expectations set out, what you do with that learning, and also how you're managing consequences of positive and negative to reinforce newly learned behaviors. Adaptability, we'll talk a little bit more about that later, has to do with how you're managing change specifically. It also has to do with how you're managing if there is a crisis. But since most of us spend our days in the change space, not the crisis space, it's really about how do you successfully deliver meaningful change around food safety. And I'll show you a couple of examples as for how we as an industry really have some improvement opportunities there. Consistency is around procedures, processes. It's about your data as well, how you use data to engage people at different levels in your organization, acknowledging that not all data outcomes are designed for senior leaders or frontline people or middle management. Sometimes we have to be a little bit more diverse in our data outcomes to make sure that it's tailored for those that are supposed to do something with it. And then finally, the 5th dimension is around hazards and risk awareness. And that is really about how you're looking at those specific hazards in your process, in your organization, and how you take those and incorporate it into everyday speak, everyday how process flows are being managed, but also how you're educating and training and reinforcing new behaviors with individuals. So I encourage you to look into the GFSI position paper. If you haven't already, you'll find a lot of different material in there around each of these 5 dimensions. And also there's, it's been built by 37 global food safety leaders. So it's a good compilation of experiences from many different countries and companies and people. The dimensions are also part of the maturity model that we use in Cultivate to measure food safety culture. And that's divided into 5 stages. So you see 5 stages at the top of this model. And then we have the dimensions from the GFSI work. And then we split that into values. Values of really serve the purpose of getting, now you dive into the dimensions one level down and where it becomes really practical, what you can do with it. What's powerful with maturity models is that it gives you a continuum, and you can download this one for free on our website, no strings attached for sure. If it's helpful to you, grab a copy. But it gives you this continuum of progress. So if you're in a stage 1, people might be seeing leaders take action on food safety because they have to, not because it's integrated into who your company is, but because a regulator comes in, or maybe there's a third-party auditor. And if we go right to the other end of the spectrum, it's about having the frontline really own food safety. But nobody's going to go from one stage of regulators telling you what to do to food safety is owned by frontline overnight, nor can you go there in one step. So you need to take this progressive approach to improvement. It takes, obviously, and you hear this a lot, I'm sure, culture change takes time. But the last thing you want to do is rush this journey. You want to take baby steps along the way, and we'll hear a little bit more about how you can do that later. We have a global benchmark against this, and that's what we work with the DMI Institute about as well. So we developed this global dairy food safety culture dashboard with DMI. And what it does really measures against, again, you have your dimensions, and then we have the values in here. So company commitment, leadership messaging, management engagement are some of those. And every single company that we measure their culture with gets their own dashboard. They can see how they're standing against the benchmark. So in this case, the benchmark is 3.0, so we're right in that no phase. And this particular company has an average of 2.6. And just remember when you're looking at these numbers that if you have to move your culture 0.1 along the way, or if it goes back 0.1, it is a fairly substantial change. It takes quite a bit of effort to move it just a little bit like that. Then we look at the top strengths. In this case, in our benchmark, we're seeing leadership messaging and learning, and this is just for the dairy companies in our database, as the top performing in values that we have in here on the enablers. And this particular company has its top strengths in learning and leadership messaging as well. So when we're looking at leadership messaging, it's really, I'm going to go into this a little bit more detail, but it's about how employees or managers see their leaders bring food safety to the forefront. Then we look at their top weaknesses as well. Benchmark is saying that it's change management and problem solving. This particular company has the low scores in change management and recognition. All of these values are mapped against the benchmark, and they can be sorted on all sorts of things so that the company can take best action, both in communicating the findings out to their team members, but also can action it over time. So if we look at the aggregated data across all of the companies, so this today we have 104 companies in our benchmark, and at this point when this was pulled, we had 101. And of the dairy companies in there, what we're seeing across the 101 companies, the strongest in leadership messaging. Of all of them in the benchmark, the 101, 19% of our companies have that. In dairy, it's 46%. So in other words, for dairy companies, they're much stronger in the leadership messaging than the average or than the rest of our sectors in the benchmark. Now, when we did a little bit of deep dive on this, it was clear that there is messaging from leadership in many cases, but as we'll see when we go in and look at where dairy companies are the weakest, sometimes that doesn't always flow right to the front line and gets interpreted the way intended. But the way that leadership messaging is measured here, it's really about, are our leaders actually willing to stop the line if we have a risk of making unsafe food? And again, dairy companies are much stronger in that particular cultural aspect of leadership messaging. The second, as you saw in the dashboard, second strongest area is around learning. And we'll hear much more from Rachel on that one in a second. So that's about management, making sure that I know food safety rules, that I know what's expected of me. And that really came out quite strong in dairy companies as well, that you have some very established learning systems. Third one was around company commitment, asking questions to better understand what I do for food safety. So am I being given the chance to ask those questions as the third one, and documents as the fourth one. I have the procedures that I need for my area, and therefore I know what to do. So there's obviously a connection between learning and documents here. There's also a connection between leadership messaging and company commitment, which happens to be in the same dimension as well. As you saw before, there is a difference between what dairy companies are, what we're measuring in dairy companies versus the rest of the benchmark, the global benchmark. But I think what's really important to look at here is, does this mean that companies are perfect on these particular enablers? No, but there are some strengths that are worth being celebrated as well. And then really acknowledge where team members are telling leadership that they're doing an okay job, and then focus on where you can make improvements. So that's an important point. And I know, Rachel, that you have at Bulla, you've had some focus on specifically the skills development with your teams. And I'm wondering if you can share a little bit with us about that.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we were reflecting on when we were looking at different ways of doing things at Bulla is we'd always been very much a sort of compliance culture, and that was what drove everything. It was audits and compliance and waving a big stick around and a sledgehammer sometimes. And we're sort of getting to the point where we could only go so far with that. It just didn't seem to be resonating. You know, I've had a bit of an epiphany thinking we just get audited more than anyone I've ever heard of. We have regulatory audits, we have customer audits, we have, you know, global standards, and it just didn't seem to be making much of a shift in how we did things. So when we decided to look at food safety culture as an option, or as that sort of breakthrough next step in our journey, we had to think about how we actually supported that and deployed that, because you really couldn't advance into that space with the same type of leader that you would historically find in a food safety and quality team. And society's changed. You know, the kind of people that come to work at Bulla or any company aren't the same people that would have worked there 40 years ago. People are coming in with a lot more education. They're coming in with university degrees. The food manufacturing environment's more complex, so you can't just stand there and yell at people and tell them what to do. And I have to admit, I was pretty much big on that back in my day, because I had some pretty bad role models. So this has been a lot about my personal development as well, and changing the way I do things. It was very much, you know, you had to do it because I say so, or because an auditor said so. And that was okay back in the day. People would just do it without question. These days, people want to understand why they're doing things, or why something matters. And if they understand that, it resonates with them more, and they're more likely to actually do it and sustain it, and actually come with improvements and ideas and suggestions that can drive it forward. So myself and my team, we aren't interested in being the compliance cops anymore. I mean, there's always an element of that we have to do, because you just can't get away from it, but it's about doing it in a different style. We kind of see ourselves more as coaches, educators and mentors and influencers, and the onus is really on the production teams to take responsibility for food safety, and we give them the guidance and the tools to do that. And I'm not going to stand here and say that's an easy thing to do, and I'm not going to say that we've got it right, but we're trying, and it's pretty much, it can be one step forward, 10 steps back sometimes, and particularly when you've got a largely seasonal or casual workforce, it's a really big challenge, and you've got to have some pretty well established infrastructure to be able to support the upskilling of a constant intake of people. And we're definitely not there yet. We've really got a lot of work to do, but I think that this approach is much more successful than the previous authoritarian approach that we would have had back in the day. Rather than going out, and this has been a really hard one for me to come to terms with over the years, is moving to leading problem solving rather than solving the problem. I think when you go into food safety and quality, naturally you're a sort of a hardwired problem solver, and your instinct is to say, I know what to do, let's just go and do it. And that sort of absolves everyone else of having any input or getting involved or buying into it. So we tend to sort of coach people through or lead the problems, the root cause analysis, rather than standing there telling people what the outcome is. And really the kind of people that we want in our team now have the stronger emphasis on leadership and relationship building skills. And it's really quite a challenge to find the right kind of people, particularly when you're in a regional area. I think it's probably less of a challenge now with COVID, because people are sort of moving out of the cities, and you know, we've had an influx of new people into Colac, and so it's not as difficult as it was. But to get people with the right skill set and technical knowledge, as well as those people skills, is really difficult, because a lot of the time you have either one or the other. So we've had a lot of success in developing people from within our organisation, and we're working really more on offering a career path from the factory floor to, you know, the executive team, and developing people to various stages along the way. So yeah, that's our story about skills and development.
And as you keep saying, Rachel, it's not, you're not trying to say that you're there or that it's easy.
No.
It takes a huge effort to keep it going and make this kind of change.
Definitely.
Yeah. Thank you, Rachel. And it somewhat ties into when we're going to talk about what we're finding as the weakest areas in these assessments. 76% of our benchmark is weakest in the area of managing food safety change. So it's in the adaptability dimension. This is 84% of our dairy companies, so it's slightly higher than our benchmark, but it's still the weakest area is in and around managing change. So what does that look like? When we're talking about managing change in our maturity model, it's about involvement of individuals in food safety changes. And I think Rachel just gave a great example of how you need to also look at the people that you're hiring into your organizations, because managing change is a skill set that doesn't necessarily come with everybody. Can be taught to a lot of people, but it is ultimately about how you're asking questions of others to make sure that they feel involved in food safety changes. The second weakest area is around recognition. How do individuals get recognized for what they do for food safety? And I think the biggest challenge that our clients have in this particular area is that recognition goes from thank you to a full-blown cross-company annual event, big scale recognition event. But it takes a lot of effort to actually say what kind of recognition will make most sense for my team and for the individuals in it. And that particular effort of really diving into, does it make sense for my team to have a pizza lunch, or do they actually not care? And does it mean more to a manager who might be a single mom to get an extra day off so that she can be home with her family? And so really thinking through what types of recognition makes or has meaning to my team members and individuals, and then structuring your recognition program that way. That takes effort, but it's absolutely worth it. The third weakness that we saw was around problem solving. So that's around feeling that if I work in an area, both as a manager, as a leader, as a frontline team member, am I actually actively being asked to be involved if there is a problem around food safety that needs to be solved? Or, and I love what Rachel said before, that I think a lot of us as food safety professionals, we are somewhat problem solving junkies. We sort of like to jump in feet first and get control of a problem. Do we take the time to step back and ask those questions of others? How would you solve this problem? Or what do you see going on? Because often we're not the ones that are necessarily doing the jobs every day where problems can go wrong. The last one, the fourth one on the list of weaknesses, is around data. And that's using data. Again, when we talk about data in the context of culture, it's not about whether you have data. It's not about whether you collect data. It's in how you're actually using data and insights driven from the data that you're collecting to share with others as a film of feedback to how they're engaging with food safety, and also whether the behaviors that they have adopted and show every day are actually impacting how safe your food is. So in this case, it's around sharing how I perform based on food safety data. And So yes, you can see there's the top two are in the people dimension. It's all about how you're involving people, how you're asking people that are working with you in your food business about food safety in their area, and how they can get involved if it needs to change. Dairy, Rachel, I know that you've certainly looked at this at Bulla, and you've already talked about how you're creating change, both with your values and also your skills development and leadership. You want to talk a little bit more about your journey?
Yeah, I think we're kind of early adopters in the whole food safety culture thing from an Australian perspective, and we were really lucky to be part of the Dairy Food Safety Victoria Dairy RegTech program, which was piloting the use of food safety culture as part of their overall food safety compliance program. And so we got to do that as part of a cohort of 10 dairy companies. That was everything from a little farmhouse cheese manufacturer to the large multinationals. And it was just a fantastic experience. And I really felt that out of all my years of working in food safety and quality, it was one of the most significant things I'd ever been involved in. And that's where we got to know Lone and her methodologies as well. Because it really was that situation where we had been on that hamster wheel of audits, corrective actions, and just didn't feel like it was resonating with our people. It certainly wasn't driving any improvements in food safety or quality outcomes. So this was a set of tools that we could use that really just made a massive difference to our company. And we piloted it with one site, and then we've most recently had an assessment done on all our manufacturing sites. And the great thing that we got out of it was the site that we piloted, in their second assessment, they'd made a massive shift. I mean, massive in terms of culture shift. It was huge. And it was just really gratifying to see that the actions that we'd taken, while we still have a long way to go, it all started to make sense. In terms of engaging the wider business, that it's definitely not an easy thing to do. It makes a lot of sense from an operational perspective. But it was challenging to tell a story to the non-operational sides of the business and get it to the board and the executive team. That it was really around, we talked about the problems and the things we were trying to address, but to go to them with the solutions, which was what the food safety culture maturity model gave us. It was a solution that you could actually demonstrate clear pathways forward, that was probably less abstract than passing audits and things like that, because it was very clear what each step of the journey needed to be and where you needed to go and how it's broken down into the elements. So just using the culture maturity model as an agent for change, it made it really clear to tell that story to the people that needed to support it. And we had to bring the site leads on board. I think in any sort of food safety culture journey, that the most important people that you have to get on board, the most influential people, are the site leaders and the frontline leaders, because if they're not on board and they're not supporting and understanding it, you really can't succeed, because then you need them to absolutely understand what you're trying to achieve, so that they're working with you and not undermining what you're trying to do. They're the ones with the most impact on the people that are making the food. So if those guys don't get it, then it's nigh on impossible for the people on the floor to understand it. And it was really about personalising it. We've also started having Stop for Food Safety sessions, where we piloted it in our biggest plant, and that was one of the best things I've done in a couple of years. It was just so rewarding to talk to people directly, and instead of just getting up there talking about facts and figures and charts and audit outcomes, it was really personalising it, trying to get that message through to the hearts and minds of people of what food safety actually is and what they're responsible for, because we know factory work can be incredibly mundane and mind-numbing at times, and it's easy to lose sight of what we're trying to achieve. So just to get that message back through, and then also give people the avenue to be able to speak up. So I'll probably answer that in the question you're going to ask me later down the track line. So I don't want to jump too far ahead. But yeah, it's definitely one thing. We really harnessed the power of workplace safety and some of the things that they do, using that same message that people really understand and applying that to food safety, and it's about keeping our consumers safe. So, and friends and family and loved ones, and particularly when we're talking to people about vulnerable population, you can see the light bulb going off in people's heads about, you know, what the repercussions are if we don't get food safety right, and who are the most vulnerable people. So yeah, you've really got to get out and speak to people directly, I think, is the most powerful thing you can do.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. And I'm going to pick up on that a little bit, what Rachel said about really, and your value. I go back to your value, Rachel, about hear and be heard. I mean, hearing, I love that hearing is first, that you have to really listen hard when others are sharing what they think is going on for food safety, what might be some of the challenges. And I think in the interest of time, I'm going to move on and just share a little bit more about what we've learned throughout the last 7 years, and then we'll go in and talk a little bit more about the hear and be heard that Rachel has shared with us. From the data as well, we're seeing that there's a pretty substantial gap between what food safety and leaders and managers are estimating their food safety culture maturity to be versus those of their colleagues in other functions. Food safety leaders and managers are saying that their culture is 52% more mature than cultures or colleagues in manufacturing and support functions. Now, this is, as you can see, against the benchmark where the gap between those food safety leaders and manufacturing and support function leaders are 28%. So it's significantly higher in dairy. So think of it this way, that if you are a food safety professional, you are saying that your culture is more mature than those in other leaders in other functions, so your colleagues in manufacturing and support functions. This is really interesting, I find, because why is it that manufacturing might be saying that your culture is less mature? And that's where I think you need to get in and ask questions and really deep dive into what is manufacturing seeing every day that we in food safety and quality can't possibly be there to see all the time as well, because typically, as you know, food safety and quality, we don't have as many resources as manufacturing. So that's an interesting insight from my perspective. Why do we see a larger gap in dairy there? And the other one is around leaders and frontline, and this is how we use the dairy dashboard as well. We can split the data into whether you are a temporary worker, you don't have anybody reporting, you lead a group of directors or managers, you lead frontline, or you lead a group of supervisors. So in other words, we're looking at those subgroups that any culture is made up of. And what we see across the dairy companies is that if you look at this yellow dot, that is the senior leadership. And if you're looking at this light blue dot, that's your frontline team members. And there's a pretty substantial gap in most of the values as for where we're seeing senior leaders report back on what they see their culture as being versus the front line, which is the light blue here again. That's a really significant gap to get after, because there could be a perception. So what leaders perceive are going on versus what's actually going on, which is what we see in the front line. And getting to know more about that gap is really crucial for your food safety culture. I look at culture as it's only as strong as the weakest link. And in this case, you would see that your front line is saying that your culture is the weakest, and that is across all of our dairy companies. So how do we get at that gap? I think one of the things we can do to get started is by starting to ask. And again, I go back to a lot of what Rachel has said already. It's about heard and be heard as one of the values, but it's also about how do you ask questions. And real quick, I think it's really interesting to acknowledge that as we grow older, we lose the willingness to ask questions. As children, we ask about 300 to 400 questions per day. I don't know how there's enough time for that. Mums seem to, on average, ask about 100 questions, and adults in general, about 20 questions. So when we're saying that we want to get at that gap and improving our food safety culture by asking more questions, first we have to acknowledge, are we actually good at asking questions? And this particular study would say that we're certainly losing some of our ability as we grow older to ask questions. The reason why I've included that information in here is when you then pair that up with a fairly large gap between what you say and what you do, specifically in the Australian culture, with that we as adults are reluctant to ask questions, or we're asking fewer questions at least, it can be really a big change to now start to say, well, if I want to engage my frontline more, then I have to ask more, I have to listen more. So acknowledging that it might not be one of our strengths, I think, is really important. Why is it that we lose our question mark as we grow older? Some of it is that we're just too egocentric to invite viewpoints from our outside our own. And this is not me saying this, believe me, it's from a Harvard Business Review article that they looked into the reasons for it. Could be that we're terrified of being seen as a nuisance, so I don't want to take time by asking questions. Or I'm simply afraid of seeming ignorant or incompetent in front of peers. So there's some really good reasons for why we might lose our question mark. So we work with the dairy or the International Dairy Foods Associations in the US, IDFA, to come up with a 3-step guide to how can you ask questions and how you tie that into food safety culture. And let me briefly walk through these with you. First, what characteristics of your food safety culture would you like to change? That's your first question. And as you've heard from Rachel, she and the Bulla team really took that to heart and said, based on our assessments, what are the characteristics that we'd like to change? So it could be that you would like to see we celebrate 0 findings in our environmental monitoring program today. Well, are you wanting to keep that cultural characteristic, or do you actually want to celebrate finding something in your environmental monitoring program? Could also be that you have a cultural characteristic. We're proud that our investments in equipment and infrastructure have the latest technology and it's cheap. Well, that's a cultural characteristic. But is that the characteristic that you want to maintain when you're improving your food safety culture? So asking questions, and you know what, I really encourage you to, if you get an assessment or if you don't, just select one characteristic that you know if you went after this one in your particular company, you could see an improvement in your culture. The second step, what would you like to learn by asking questions in the first place? It could be that you are asking questions to drive conversations and solve problems. That you show others that we value their knowledge because you're asking them what they know. That you're demonstrating that as leaders are vulnerability, and that nobody has all the answers. So there's really a way to use questions in improving your food safety culture to drive that conversation, to really show others that you value their knowledge, but also that you as a leader is okay with being vulnerable to ask questions in the first place. So get after that adults are just asking 20 questions a day. Again, what would you like to ask, or what would you like to learn? It's really important, I think, to have questions that are that relates back to those groups that we saw in the dashboard as well, because the questions are different. You don't necessarily ask questions of an executive team or middle management or frontline teams in the same way. So for your executive team, it might be important to know where in our business risk discussions do we address uncertainties in our environmental monitoring or data. Middle management, how do we as a team encourage everyone to look for pathogens rather than avoid them? So again, we're trying to change that characteristic of celebrating zeros. Maybe of your front line, you would like to know, what can we do to constantly look for pathogens in our work environment? So the question you are asking is really to encourage others to participate and also to raise their hand if there's something that doesn't exactly work, and you need to be able to address or ask some questions that are addressing each of these groups to narrow the gap because it's the gap that's creating, excuse me, that's creating some of the challenges for us in culture. Then what do you want to do with these answers? So if you're opening up the question box, then you certainly have to also be willing to say, okay, we're getting answers back. What are we going to do about them? Or what are we going to do with them? And maybe you decide on potential change and involving all three teams. So executives, your middle management, and your frontline. And that's again, to get after that very significant gap that we're seeing across dairy companies in our database. Maybe you track progress and celebrate the small tangible wins through ovations and recognition, one win at a time. So if somebody comes back with an answer that is leading to an improvement, celebrate it and use the questions asked in your celebration. Demonstrate how, do you know what, Sally came along and asked, how can we make this easier for us to clean the belt every time that we're done with a run? And this is how Sally's question led to an improvement. So show how you're using these answers to create change. Could number of questions asked become a leading indicator for food safety measure? So can you actually track questions asked so that you can get at a leading indicator around food safety? And I think that to me is a bit of a provocative statement, but also just an encouragement to say that sometimes our traditional food safety indicators and measures are not necessarily what's going to get people speaking up so that we can hear what they have to say. Rachel, I know that you have again done some fantastic work in how you're engaging your frontline by asking them what they see to improve every day. Is that right?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we did with the Stop for Food Safety was just give people an opportunity to speak up about, you know, any of their concerns or anything that they wanted to raise. And the key message that came through was that they just didn't feel like people were listening to them. They didn't have a clear forum to raise issues, or if they did raise issues, they just disappeared into a black hole and they were never given any feedback as to whether those issues were addressed. And it was just stupid little things like, you know, I only got one foamer for 3 production lines, and just stuff like that that's so easy to fix. So we gave people a message that they have the right to ask for things. We gave them an escalation process, which was a number of ways that they could be heard if they felt that their direct leaders weren't responding appropriately or actioning the things that they were raising. So we gave them everybody, the leadership team, phone numbers and email addresses, my email address. We have a food safety inbox where people can send information or ask questions or ask for things or escalate issues. We also have a suggestion box in the canteen where people can anonymously raise things if they want to. We've got a whistleblower help stop line that people can ring if they want to report some really concerning behaviour. So just to make sure that there were a number of avenues that people could feel that if they weren't, you know, if they followed the direct process and escalate things to their immediate leader and that wasn't being listened to or addressed, or if they were being asked to do the wrong thing or coerced into, you know, doing something that was potentially a risk to food safety, that they had plenty of ways to speak up about it. And the key message to the leadership team is that there has to be that you have to close that feedback loop. You can't just ask for feedback and do nothing about it. And yes, everybody's busy, but just triage it. Make sure that you deal with the low-hanging fruit. You know, have a process that you can feed these actions into, and you know, put it into your manufacturing excellence process, because this type of thing fits in really well with that. So food safety doesn't have to stand on its own. It's easily integrated into normal manufacturing processes, and that's kind of what we're trying to do. I can't stand hand on heart and say it's 100% successful, but it's definitely a start, and I firmly believe it's the right way to go. It's just you've got to be really persistent and keep checking back in. I think one of the key learnings for me is you can't launch and leave this stuff. You've got to go back and check on it. And unfortunately, a pandemic makes it really difficult, because I love my factories. I love to be out in the factory talking to people. That to me is the most rewarding thing ever, and building those relationships and just listening to people and what they've got to say, because it's the people on the floor doing this work that have the most insight into what's going on. And missing out on those casual conversations with people you run into is a real loss. So there's just, you can't do that on a Teams meeting. So yeah,
that's so true, so true. And I think, Rachel, your point around you got to be willing to do something when you get these answers, and planning that out. So it's important to ask. It's important to get these assessments of your food safety culture, but you've got to be willing to do something, because otherwise we're all going to stop talking and sharing if nobody does anything with what we share, right?
Yeah, it really just makes people disengaged and bitter and twisted, and they're doing the right thing, hand on heart. They're doing exactly what they've been asked to do, and if it's not followed through at the next level, then that's where you need to focus your efforts.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much, Rachel. We're going to start wrapping up in the interest of time, and I want to just share this with you as well. So we worked with a psychology graduate or PhD candidate now, Deborah Metcalf at CSU, and Deborah helped us also just ask some questions around each of the 5 dimensions as you see here. And I'm not going to go through every one of them, but if you are in a situation where you're just ready to ask some questions of those that you work with every day, and one of these areas is your weakness. So let's say you have in and around the people dimensions, you might need to just ask people the question around, is proactive behavior being rewarded? Do all employees receive food safety communication? Simple questions, but you know what? It could be some that you want to share also with your frontline supervisors. Like Rachel said, right now, hard to be on site with everybody and have those casual conversations. Take your supervisors through these questions and say, frontline supervisors, can you ask some of these questions in your team huddles on a regular basis to keep the conversation for food safety going? In closing, so I had the great pleasure a while ago to meet Anne-Marie and Carla, as you see here, with their beautiful goats. And they're with Holy Goat. You've heard from Rachel at Bulla today about the beautiful journey that the Bulla is taking, all of the wins and the challenges that come with that. When it comes to asking questions, I've never been on site with anybody that asks as many questions as Anne-Marie and Carla. And they're great questions from anywhere from, how do I use my data? Do we have the right data? Do we need to make any changes to it? How do we best engage? Why do our people not speak up sometimes when they feel they have to? And I just think that Anne-Marie and Carla have been real role models when it comes to asking questions and also encouraging that with the people that they work with every day. With that, thank you so much for taking the time with us today. And I know that we are running rapidly out of time for questions. I'll make sure I get with Jennifer to have any questions answered and shared back out with you. And just recall or remember all of that doing the right thing isn't always easy, but it's always right, as you've heard from Rachel today. And I hope that both of us have been able to share some learnings with you that you can take with you into your companies and organizations to continue the beautiful journey that you have on your food safety and quality culture. And with that, thank you very much. And I'll hand it back over to Jennifer for closing.
Thank you so much, Lone and Rachel. I am totally amazed. You've got a wonderful amount of information that you've provided there. I do encourage people to click on the feedback link that I've put in the chat box and provide your feedback on today's webinar, because we're always aiming to improve. Now, Ian has just written there's some great principles discussed here that I think have broad application or put across all business operations, not only food safety, but has to help to enable cultural shifts and operational excellence. Thanks very much. Yeah.
Couldn't agree more, Ian.
Yeah. And I think it worked very well with Rachel adding in her Australian perspective on things. So thank you, Rachel. That was really fantastic. Now, unfortunately, we haven't got any more questions coming in, but we still have lots of participants online. If you would like to ask a question, we are really encouraging you to do so. One of the things that I always think about is how all companies have to have casual workforce come in and help fill in. And that is such a challenge to get them to follow food safety protocols and the same culture. Have you got any comments on that, please?
Sure do. So I think it calls even more for what we do every day with those that are with us consistently in our teams. And you potentially want to look at, if you have an area where you have temporary workforce more than in other areas, to have culture buddies. So because culture lives in groups, and that's absolutely what differentiates our individual behaviors from culture, is that culture lives in groups. It's these assumptions that we've decided are valid, and therefore we will pass them on to those that join our teams. So having a person that's a culture champion, call it something else, but that really embodies your company culture, including food safety and quality, and therefore can be the buddy for temporary workforce as well, to make sure that they see what is the right way to behave, but they also have a point of reference. I think that would be great. And then I think we also, Jennifer, just need to acknowledge that transitory workforce is just inherent to food businesses often, and therefore we need to put systems like that in place.
Yeah, that's right. Okay then, so some other comments. Really, thank you so much. Great to hear positive examples. Great webinar, which I'll share. Thank you. So we haven't got any questions coming through, but if you have questions, Lone, did you provide your details there? You provide your website? And plus that must have a wealth of information on it that people can refer to if they want to.
Sure can. And
now I'm alone to get the PDF sorted and emailed out to everybody.
That sounds great. And anytime, if anybody has any questions, do just email me, and we'll get you some answers.
All right then. One thing in particular, just before we finish, Rachel, I loved your comment about dealing with the low-hanging fruit. And I think that is really showing respect for the people in your company, and absolutely fantastic. And another thing is, I noticed that your PhD student was from Charles Sturt University, which is a great another link with Australia. Yes.
Absolutely. It's really been a pleasure working with Deborah, and we'll be doing, and she's doing some more in the future, and she comes from the college, or the Department of Psychology, so she's bringing also, again, more depth into this field that we can use for the future.
Well, hopefully that can continue, that relationship.
Absolutely, we're working on it, but believe me.
Yeah. Thanks so much then. Well, we'll close this webinar. If anyone has further questions, you're welcome to email me and I can pass them on. Another comment there. Thanks everyone. Great experience and very insightful. So positive things out of this. Thanks so much, Lone. Thank you so much, Rachel. And we'll talk again soon. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jennifer.